Hey, welcome to one of my favorite things to do in the backyard, and that is smoking meat. And this is perhaps one of the best meats that I do, at least. I enjoy it all the time. Hopefully I don't burn my family out on it, and that is brisket. And today I want to talk about a technique that made this brisket right here. It's something I've been doing a lot the last couple of years, differently than how I first did brisket. Most people, when they do brisket, they cook it as a whole. They have the flat and the point or the tip all together. They trim it and smoke it, and it's amazing. Really a good way to do it. The problem is the flat and the point cook at separate temperatures. So today I'm going to talk about a technique I use to cook it a little different, and I think it makes an absolutely amazing brisket. It's not, I wouldn't say it's any more difficult. In fact, it might even be a little easier in some ways and a little bit more foolproof. So check out today's video. Hopefully this is interesting, and enjoy. I am so excited about this Best of Summer series. We are doing a brisket today, and actually tonight, getting it all prepped so that I can put it on at midnight and then let it smoke throughout the night. And it should be ready somewhere between lunch and dinner. We'll kind of see how this thing goes. But this brisket is about 17 pounds. It was about a $3.50 difference between this prime and what is, I think it was the choice or select, whatever it was. Picked it up at Costco tonight, and I'm ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and trim this thing as though I was doing it as a whole brisket, so I'll kind of show you that. And then when I get to the stopping point there, I'm actually going to show you my preferred way of doing this, where I actually split the tip and flat and smoke them separately, and talk about some of the reasoning behind that. What we have here, and if you've ever, or if you've never done a brisket, typically when you get it from the butcher, you're going to have one side that has a lot of the fat. We'll do some trimming of this. We're going to leave a thin layer overall, and then there's this chunk closer to me. Let me flip it back over. Ooh, it's slimy and heavy. There's this big ridge of fat here that we're going to trim pretty much off. This is actually good if you want to render it for soap or other things, or just have that for your fridge. But we're going to get this thing, just kind of some of these little loose pieces off, because we're going to have a beautiful bark that we want to have when this thing is all said and done. And so where there's fat, well, the fat can be good for it. There's already a lot of fat throughout this and inside of it, so we don't necessarily need it for protection. So what I like to do is I like to just start by kind of trimming this big piece off, kind of seeing what we're working with. And so if you're doing a whole brisket, or if you're separating them, it's going to be kind of the same concept. You want to get the big chunks of fat off of there. So what's going to happen is this vein of fat is going to get a little smaller, but it's going to go through, and this is going to be this flat here. It kind of goes down into it and then stops, and so this will be the tip. This tip here, the tip over here, this is full of fat, really good marbling, becomes extremely good. This is the best part, I think, of the brisket. A lot of flavor. It is a little more fatty, but when it's done, but that's what gives it so much flavor and juiciness. The flat is also really good and has good flavor, but tends to be a little bit more lean. And if you have company coming over who kind of likes less fat in their food, they'll oftentimes go for the flat. It's also great for tacos and other things. See, this thing is just getting a little bit smaller and smaller as I go through. Now, if I'm doing this at a whole brisket again, I will do the same thing. I'm going to cut this down quite a bit because this is not going to do anything for the meat. It's got plenty of fat in there, and a lot of times when you're finished, if you're doing a whole brisket, you will separate this. One of the first things you'll do is kind of just cut this and then cut the two pieces separately. So I will do kind of almost like a little divot in this. You can kind of zoom in here and see it's getting a little bit more kind of a channel, and I will keep cutting this channel just to get the big chunks out. later when we split this, we're actually gonna, this is where we'll continue on. That's probably good if I was doing this as a whole. This is probably about where I'd stop. Okay, so that's pretty good for that piece. Now, you could spend all day trying to just trim all these little pieces out. This is all going to be wonderful when, as this thing smokes. That's going to be just beautiful in there. Let's flip it over. Now, this fat side, there's different philosophies people have on this. Some people like to leave, basically leave a thin layer of fat throughout this to protect the meat, keep it juicy, flavorful. My philosophy is I like to go kind of low on this because I want plenty of bark, the kind of the crust of the meat, which brings so much flavor to the meat. So I actually like to go through and get this down, you know, instead of being like a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch, get it pretty close and even to where meat's exposed. So I'm going to start by kind of figuring out where some of the big pieces of meat or fat are. Trim that. This piece here, you'll see this sometimes on your bigger briskets. A lot of people will go in for just cleanliness. They'll trim this off, put this in as ground beef somewhere else later. I will oftentimes leave that as meat. It's going to get smoked up. It'll be great. But if you're kind of going for a nice appearance, you might cut that off. As I'm cutting through this, I'm kind of keeping it along the line there, so you know, basically no meat's being cut off, but this will all be exposed for some good seasoning on there. Just going slow and gently, checking every once in a while. If I start going a little deep, I back it off. If I'm not going deep enough, I go a little deeper. Okay, here I'm starting to go a little deep, so in my cutting, so I'm going to back it off and bring it back up. Alright, so again back here we see there's this vein that it's like a V. It goes underneath here and up around here. So if I were just to keep cutting this, this would separate. And a lot of times when I'm smoking this as a whole, I'll go and partially cut this down through the fat. And if there's any big chunks of fat in there, I'll open that up. But this is going to be the tip. This is your flat. And at the end of this, you'll separate this and cut them certain directions. They actually go different ways as far as the grain. So if I was using this as a whole right now, this is about actually how I would, you know, that's about actually how I'd have it. So I would take this just as it is and take my seasoning, whatever seasoning you want to use, go extremely generous all over this thing, really, you know, the sides everywhere, just really massage that into it. And then you don't need to let it sit overnight or anything like that. A lot of times I'll do this here in the evening and then put it in the fridge, and then like at midnight, either right before I go to bed, or sometimes I'll wake up early and throw it on the smoker so that this thing has, you know, hours and hours and hours to smoke. If you're doing a whole brisket, it can take a little bit longer. If you separate it, sometimes it can be done a little bit faster because it's not as thick in parts. But the advantage, and this is the way I like to do my brisket, I'd say my preferred way. I like to take my brisket and actually split it before I smoke it. Partly I get a lot more exposure for seasoning on both sides of the bark. There's a lot more pieces that have that on there, the flavoring, that's great. And then the flat and the tip, they cook differently. You know, the marbling and the fat will cause one piece to be done earlier, and a lot of times the tip is done, but the flat needs to get to the right temperature. In my case here, I'm going to go ahead and separate this. So I'm going to keep working this vein of fat around here until I separate the flat and the tip here. And so I'll just kind of, just like I was doing before on the top, kind of just keep working that fat. And you can kind of see here, I'm like, okay, there's still fat, I'm okay. If I start hitting meat, I back off whichever way I need to. So you can see there's some meat, so I'm going up a little bit more. And just kind of keep curling it as I cut. And I know where this is going because I can see this here. And as long as I'm cutting fat, I'm good. And it goes all the way through. So you can see this flat is just continuing to cut through. It's getting a little bit close to the meat, so I cut down a little bit more. And right towards the end, you'll start getting a little bit thinner. You have to be a little careful. And then finally it just pretty much splits apart. It's not really that difficult. You just got to go kind of slow. Helps to have a sharp knife that can kind of be guiding it. Just keeps going. Again, it's all fat through there. I'm just going to trim it right there. All right, so much more manageable size piece. So comparatively, this is probably 2/3 and 1/3. So the flat is definitely bigger. I've had a couple of smaller ones where it's almost 50-50, but yeah, so just beautiful. This will all be seasoned here. I'll come through and just do a little bit more trimming here, and then this one, trim a little bit of the fat off of there, and this thing will be good to go. This thing's gonna have so much flavor. So let me set this aside and we'll do the next part. As you're cutting this, if the depth, if you've got a 1/4 to maybe 1/8 of an inch or less, it's gonna be just fine at the end. Most of that it'll render, it'll create a nice flavor on there. So it's the real thick parts that you're really concerned about. Like, I think that's good enough just to leave that. All right, as far as the seasoning, there are so many options, and I think they all taste good. I've got these 3 that are just in the cupboard. I use the Montreal seasoning all the time. It's just something I've had. I mean, it's easy to get, but I've used all these, especially this one and this one for brisket quite a bit. Anything will do great. You want salt in there, pepper in there, some garlic, and just go really generous, and it's going to be good. The smoke flavor. So I'm going to go with the Montreal seasoning, and I do touch the bottle with my messed up hands. Try not to touch the lid part, and then I'll clean this up afterwards. But I basically go and I get a nice generous coat, and I'm going to kind of massage this in there. Some people will use like a mustard as kind of something to help it stick to. In my experience, it's unneeded. It doesn't do anything with flavor. It doesn't seem to help keep the stuff on there any more than just being a little bit moist from being meat. And again, if I had all that fat cap on there, this would just be adhering to the fat cap, and a lot of that would just be thrown away. Most people don't eat the big chunks of fat, but when you have it kind of close to the meat and even some of the meat exposed, all that's going to be just beautiful. You'll see it later on. I always get the edges, especially on the thicker parts. My first couple times doing a brisket, I was always afraid I was putting way too much salt or seasoning on there. But as you'll see when this is done, put more, be generous. And then same thing here. Now there's amazing mixtures you can buy online or different stores. I'm sure they're all great. I've tried a few different ones. But again, this is just a go-to solid one. So I'm not sponsored by any of these people. No one's ever mailed me a free one. All right, so I kind of push that in. So kind of the plan is, I'm going to put this on the smoker at 200 degrees and let it go overnight. Do kind of a really slow smoke, and then in the morning when it kind of hits the stall, so maybe around 170 degrees or so, I'll go ahead and wrap it up and from the wrapping, let it kind of cook all the way till it hits 201, 202, and then pull this thing off, let it rest for a couple hours in a cooler, wrapped up in the paper and whatever else. Put a towel on there, just keep that thing insulated, and give it a few hours to just let those juices absorb, and it's not going to cool down too fast with big chunks of meat like this. And then it should be ready for an amazing meal. So let's get the smoker ready and see how this thing turns out. Alright, so the brisket has hit the stall. That typically will come in the 150s up through the 170s, 180-ish. And it's this very slow period where the temperature kind of just stops, hence the stall. And it'll stay on that for hours and hours. And it's not a bad thing necessarily, but this is typically where a lot of times people will wrap it. It helps keep the moisture in. It also can kind of speed it through the stall so it doesn't cook for quite as long. And so different methods. You can keep it on the smoker the whole time, and it creates a little bit harder, deeper crust, which is actually really good. Just a different style, so I encourage you, if you're doing a lot of briskets over the years, try it out and see if you like it that way. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and wrap it. I got my butcher paper here, and I'm going to go ahead and take it out, just wrap it up. It doesn't need to be anything fancy, just kind of keeps the moisture in. We'll put it back on the smoker and let it continue to cook until it hits about 201, 202. You could also, instead of using the smoker at this point, you could move it into an inside oven. It's not getting any smoke from the pellets, that sort of thing. It's just, for me, I like to keep it on here because it's less mess. Just put it on here, it continues to go. Don't have to worry about oven stuff in the house. And so, let's open it up and see how it looks. And as always, brisket just always looks amazing. Thermometer's out. Place those after I have it rewrapped. Let's start with the tip. And as far as folding it, it doesn't need to be perfect. Just kind of tuck it under itself. Be somewhat loosely wrapped, and when I flip it upside down, it'll hold it in place. Good to go. As far as the flat, same idea. So the way I have this paper, I'm going to go ahead and actually wrap it this direction. Keep it going the same way. My thermometers. Then these are going to go, just continue to cook. It's probably going to be another, I could be 4 hours or so. Sometimes on some of the smaller briskets you can get away with 2 to 3 hours after wrapping it, but we'll kind of see how this goes, give it plenty of time. I'm keeping my temperature about 200, 225 inside. I've got it set out to 225 and 250 out here, and that's just going to be kind of slow cook. You could, if you're in a little bit more of a hurry, turn it up to 275, possibly even 300, and let it speed up a little bit. But one of the big keys for brisket is low and slow. So let's continue to let this thing go, and we'll check back in a little while. Okay, so we're at 201 to 203 for the flat. The point tip was already finished, and that's actually been done for about hour and a half or so. So you can see the cooking temperatures. On some of your smaller briskets, there's typically a 5-degree difference or so when they're between the flat and the point. So with a smaller brisket, you're oftentimes going to have about a 5-degree difference in temperature between the flat and then the higher temperature will be the point or the tip. A bigger brisket like this, it's even more so. In fact, after I pulled that last one out, I went back and just kind of moved the thermometers around a little bit, and it dropped. One of those was in the upper 180s, I believe, kind of around 190 or so. So that was quite a bit of difference there, and it's taken a good hour and a half or more to get this part finished up, but it's finished. So it is time to take this off and let it rest. Okay, so oftentimes I'll put this in a cooler, for several hours. I'm actually going to just let the flat sit in my oven for, turned off for the next hour, hour and a half. And then, you can see up here I've got the point already up there. In fact, I'll just move those so they're both in the same spot. Those are now just going to rest in there for a while. Cooler is even better if you're going to be storing it for a long time, as you really want to insulate that, and call it good. All right, so the brisket has rested. This one's actually been resting for about 3 hours, and this one for about an hour and 15 or so, hour and a half. We're going to open them up, slice them up, take a look, see how they are. Here's the point or the tip. Still warm. Again, this has been out for 3 hours or more, and still nice and warm. All right, and here's the flat. Just beautiful. All right, so as far as trimming it, you can see the grains. I don't know if you can see this in the camera, but the grains run this way. I can see that just from the lines there. And I could actually go and cut this down the middle and have a little bit smaller pieces, but just for the sake of beauty, let's go ahead and do a slice right down the middle. And it is crunchy on the outside and smooth like butter on the inside. You can see beautiful smoke lines, the rind, the crust out there. Juicy. Let's go ahead and cut a piece of this off. I'm going to set this off to the side here. Ooh, that looks so good. Okay, actually, I got to do a sample now. We'll do another sample in a minute. So this is the flat. Again, hardly any fat in this as far as big chunks of fat. A lot of people who like lean meat like this, it's great for sandwiches, that kind of thing. Excuse me. Every time I sample brisket on film, I'm sure I say the same thing. It's always amazing. Again, one little thing I love about this technique, there is twice as much bark, it feels like, because I got bark on both sides. They're cooked separately. I love the bark part. It's tender. Definitely doesn't have the fatty flavor of this, some of that, which I love the most, but this is amazing. And then this is just fabulous for thin slicing it. You can go and get this and just do a bunch of nice slices. It's presentable. If you can kind of look in here, you can see most of the fat was trimmed off there. There was a couple ridges. In fact, let me show you the raw pictures. But I can see a little bit of fat here that's rendered pretty well. But I can still see a little bit of that fat there. Some people don't desire that as much. It does bring a lot of flavor and juiciness, but great bark all throughout that. The whole piece is edible. but it's nice not to get the giant chunks of fat that you sometimes do if you trim it differently. Okay, and with this, you can do, with the point or the tip, you can do this in several ways. You can, you know, slice it. It actually will fall apart more. You'll see in a second if I'm doing thin slices, but that's one way. Some people will do chunks or pieces in there, and if you actually go and cut it into chunks, and then you can wrap some barbecue sauce on there, it's just really, really good. But with my knife, I'm going to go ahead and do some thin slices. This is even softer. This really is like butter. And let me actually, this is so obvious, the difference here. Okay. Check this out. So this is the tip, this is the flat, and you can just see the veins of fat. This is a so much more juicy. This is much more lean. Two preferences. Some people like both, but amazing. And I gotta sample this for you. I'll tell you what it tastes like. See if it's any good. And again, I always like the ends because you get the bark and you get the good part. All right, here we go. That is one of the greatest pieces of meat you'll ever taste. Is the Don't talk with your mouth open. Wow. Okay, the flat's good, and hopefully you picked it up. This is amazing. I mean, the flavor in that, it's not like all big slimy chunks of fat in there. There's a little bit there that, for my preference, I don't always love to have big things like that, but this is so good. The flavor, the juiciness, the little bit of the salt and the crunch on the outside, absolutely amazing. So, wow. And then I'll just go and continue to slice this up. I actually have a hard time when it's so big like this. No one's on their plate unless you have a super large. No one's eating a big piece like that. So what I will do oftentimes is I'll go ahead and just cut this down the middle. And, ooh, that was still, it's in my mouth. Oh, I want more of it. Okay, not on the camera. I'll come through here and trim this, or cut this. And you can just see beautiful, just that, the gloss, the glossiness, that's all the fat, the juice in there. So let me just kind of, again, bring it down here. You can see some of the differences with this. Now, if I were presenting this and people came through, most people would be taking this because it's just so good. They both taste amazing. This is good if you can put a sauce on there. That'll even add to it. Nothing's wrong with this, but wow, you gotta have more of that. Hey, hopefully this is pretty interesting and also insightful for you as you think about your next meal and cooking brisket. Don't be scared of it. You don't have to use a smoker. There's lots of ways you can do it. It's pretty forgiving, but you need a good thermometer and lots of time. So enjoy and check out some of the other YouTube adventures that we got going on. Have a good life.